That little book that I published recently entitled Yeshua, which I called Reading Between the Lines of the Scriptures, I retold the story of the two disciples at Emmaus, which happens to be our gospel today. I thought, if you don't mind, in place of my homily, I would just read to you my own version of the story, with Peter as the imagined narrator. Here is the story, and I beg your indulgence, it's going to be a little bit long. Peter is narrating. We did not sleep very much during that night. It was almost dawn, and we were mostly awake already, but we were still lying on the mats inside the sleeping quarter of the upper room, waiting for the daylight. Suddenly, we were startled by a knock at the main door, and we froze in fear as the rapping went on. Could it be the Roman soldiers? We silently asked ourselves. Some of us quickly ran away to hide themselves in some dark corners of the upper room. But only John had the courage to come near the door and ask, "Who is it?" The answer came loud and clear. "Cleophas here. Please, open up." John looked at me. As soon as I nodded, he unlocked the door. I took the lamp from its lampstand in order to check if it was really Cleophas. John had hardly shut the door when Cleophas and his cousin rushed in and approached me excitedly and said in a suppressed tone of excitement, "Peter, the rabbi is alive. We have seen him." By then, we could see the light of dawn breaking through the slits of our closed windows. The women had prepared some food. Bartimaeus, the beggar who never left us after the master healed his blindness, had helped the women out in the kitchen and was now beckoning on us to come and have an early morning lugaw, porridge with date syrup. I took Cleophas by the hand and led him and his cousin to the kitchen table, and we sat at the stools. The others came with us. They were unable to resist the fragrant vapor of freshly cooked pounded oats with date syrup wafting in the air. I said a quick blessing over the food before I sat down and warmed my stomach with the delicious porridge that had been prepared by Martha. Cleophas did not even touch the bowl before him. He could not wait to tell his story. He had even totally forgotten that he was not supposed to be in speaking terms with me. We just had a bitter exchange of words yesterday before he and his cousin decided to walk out on us and to leave the upper room in order to seek refuge with some acquaintances of theirs. Just the day before that, the two of them sounded like they had been possessed by an evil spirit that had put them in an aggressive mood of blaming me for not being there for the rabbi when he needed me. He did not even mince words. He said straight to my face that I had lost every right to lead the group because I had denied the rabbi. Strangely, Cleophas was no longer the bitter man that he was just the other day. In fact, he had tears in his eyes as he told us about their encounter with the rabbi on the road to Emmaus. He and his cousin took turns relating how a stranger, a fellow traveler, had drawn near to them. They had not even noticed his presence behind them all the time that they were talking to each other. He narrated how the man had politely said, "Shalom, peace be with you," when they finally noticed him now already walking next to them. And Cleophas told how the stranger smiled and made the friendly gesture of offering them some dried fig snacks to munch on. How the man asked them what they had been conversing about, and how he listened intently as they told him about Jesus and the tragic things that had happened to him in Jerusalem, how this man engaged them in a spirited conversation, quoting from the scriptures in a manner that made them understand why the rabbi had to suffer and die, and how his words felt like a soothing ointment on their traumatized souls, how he warmed their hearts and set them on fire. By now, our porridge had grown cold already because none of us was even touching the food anymore. Even Martha had stopped serving in order to join her sister Mary in listening to the story of Cleophas. We were all amazed at the expression on the faces of these two men. They looked like they were in a state of trance. They had obviously been transformed by the encounter. We were waiting for the punchline. They had started by announcing that they had seen the Lord. Did they mean it figuratively or literally? Were they trying to tell us that the stranger helped them understand why Jesus had to suffer and to die in Jerusalem? Now, Cleophas was choking in his tears as he looked at his cousin and he said, "Do you remember, brother, how our hearts were burning within us as he explained to us the scriptures?" Now, John, who could not wait to hear the conclusion of the story, interrupted and he said, "And then what?" Cleophas looked at his cousin and said, as he paused to drink some water to clear his throat, "Tell them, brother." And his cousin said, "And then I told the man, 'Sir, why don't you just stay with us? It is getting late. It is evening. And you know it can be dangerous for you to go on alone in your journey. Do not worry about the dinner and the accommodation. We will give you a treat. And we can talk some more at table. Besides, the innkeeper here is our friend. He will certainly give us a big discount for the dinner and the overnight stay." And we were very happy when he said, "Yes." Oh, we were literally starving when we entered the inn. Our stomachs grumbled as we smelled the lamb stew that was boiling in the kitchen and the freshly baked bread being taken out of an earthen oven. Our guest had already drawn water from an ablution jar and washed his feet by the lavatory near the door as I waited to take my turn. He looked up from where he squatted to wash his feet. He smiled at me, and then he said, "Let me untie your sandals, and let me wash your feet, brother." I reacted, and I said, "Oh, no, sir. I can do it myself." He laughed, and he said jokingly, "Let me at least do you this little service, since you are going to pay for my dinner anyway, and including the overnight stay. That's going to be quite a lot of money. And I assure you, I have a big appetite." And he said this laughing out loud. I looked at Cleophas, who looked as surprised as I was by what he was doing, which was now becoming very familiar to us. And I am surprised that we could not say no to him. He also poured water on our hands and washed his own hands, and then handed to us some pieces of rag to wipe ourselves dry. The food had just been served on the table, waiting for a prayer of blessing. Since we were the ones who offered to host him for dinner, I had asked Cleophas to lead the prayer of blessing and to break the first bread for our guests. But as soon as we got to the table, he did something that neither Cleophas nor I had expected. You know, he himself took a piece of bread, looked up to heaven, and said the blessing. And then, as he broke the bread and handed some morsels to us, it dawned on me that there was only one person who was fond of doing this. Only one person we know who loved to play the host and who loved to volunteer to foot the bill for dinner. I looked at Cleophas, who looked at me knowingly, which meant that he was thinking exactly the same thing. We were both in tears as we ate the morsel of bread that we received from him. And then John had been attentively listening next to me, and he was annoyed by the interruption, and he excitedly asked Cleophas, "And then what? What happened next?" Now, both of them were in tears as they said in unison, "He disappeared. He just vanished from our sight." And we must have looked like we were stunned. There was silence among us as Cleophas and his cousin stared blankly at the wall with open mouths. I broke the silence, and I butted in and said, "Did he say anything before he disappeared, Cleophas?" And Cleophas replied, "Nothing, Peter." He was no longer there. But we continued our dinner in silence, as if he was still there. It felt almost like what happened right here in this upper room on that night of the Passover before he was arrested. It felt like our hearts were full, so full, much fuller than our stomachs after we ate. After we were done, the innkeeper approached us and he asked, "So, where are you guys headed to?" We looked at each other and we said in unison, "Back to Jerusalem." And we both laughed heartily. And we asked him how much we owed him for the dinner. And the innkeeper replied, "Oh, but the dinner has been paid for by your host." before he left. End of the story.